Specifically today, we're going to be talking about the Ignition QBO integration, which is one of the core integrations that we work with that I'd say probably about 70%, 60% of the customers that I'm working with regularly do use and are integrated in their Ignition account. So the Ignition QBO integration allows you to do a ton in Ignition, and let Ignition kind of be the sensor of like managing your client engagements. And we make sure that all the important stuff gets over to your QBO account. That being said, with any integration, there's kind of two directions where things happen. So sometimes Ignition is sending information to QBO, and sometimes QBO is sending information to Ignition. So I'll cover a couple key items from the QBO to Ignition side of things that you might want to be aware of. These are all kind of things that are actually really, really helpful, especially when you first get started with connecting QBO to Ignition. You probably have a bunch of existing information in QBO that's useful to have over in Ignition. So the first one is the ability to bulk import clients, or just import any clients. So you can import clients on a one-time basis, but you can also bulk import them. Really quick and easy way. If you're ready to engage a whole bunch of clients in Ignition, you're preparing, let's say, for the end of the year, and you have a bunch of clients who aren't in Ignition yet, you can bulk import them with our bulk import tool to bring them in, so you can then start building proposals for them. You can also import QBO recurring invoices and sales receipts. So if you already have someone set up with an ongoing invoice in QBO that they're currently paying whenever they receive an invoice, that seems like a good opportunity to bring them over to Ignition, re-engage with them, set up some automated payments. You can import those recurring invoices really, really easily. And lastly, as well, you can also import your QBO services. So if you already have a really great kind of menu of services listed over on QBO, and you want your service menu in Ignition to kind of match up nicely and efficiently, you can also use that to bring them in. Really great way to kind of get up and running Ignition quickly, or if there's a new area of the business you want to start using Ignition for, it's already set up in QBO, bring all that information over. The other kind of integration you can have, other side of the integration with Ignition and QBO, where you want to hop to the next slide, is the part where Ignition is sending information over to QuickBooks. So this is stuff you might already be familiar with, but the most simple part of this is Ignition's going to be sending and creating invoices over on the QuickBooks side. There's a lot of information about people's billing, their payment schedules in Ignition. What we do is we send that information over to QuickBooks. So your AR and kind of AR process and invoice revenue stuff is all kind of taken care of. Your reconciliation become really, really easy. In addition to that, we also create clients over in QuickBooks Online when we need to. So when we create an invoice over in QBO, we take a look and say, is this for an existing client or is this a brand new client? Really what this means is you don't have to go in and add every single new client to QBO every single time. Let Ignition take care of that for you. When a new client comes in, signs an engagement, is ready to start doing work with you. And lastly, a new little addition we have, and we'll talk about this in more detail, is the ability to use tracking classes. So because we're sending over invoices into QBO, not only can you track what the service line by line revenue is looking like, you can use tracking classes to get even more insight into where the revenue is coming from. So I'm going to talk about, those are kind of a little overview of the QBO and Ignition integration. I'm going to highlight a couple key items that I just talked about in a little bit more detail. So the first one I want to talk about is going to be about that importing of QBO services in bulk to be able to kind of speed up and access proposals quickly. So whether you're still kind of in the process of getting your Ignition account set up, or you're just kind of going through and want to fine tune all of your Ignition services, those Ignition services are really the core of what you will eventually build proposals out in Ignition. And as well, if you've been kind of a QBO pro for years, maybe you have a really great service list in QBO that you kind of want in Ignition to match up nicely. So the services you have in QBO, you want to be able to put them on your proposals in Ignition. We actually just launched a new import tool that basically allows you to bring those services into Ignition super, super quickly and kind of ready to be used right away in Ignition. So if you're, Maria's going to walk through a little bit of a demo of how to do this shortly. So the one key with that, though, if you would go to the next slide, is that when you bring over your services from QBO, one of the main differences between services in QBO and Ignition is that Ignition services will almost always have full detailed descriptions. This is kind of what becomes the scope of work on the proposals that you're creating in Ignition. However, if you've just been kind of sending off invoices in QBO, there's a good chance you might have some services in QBO that have a name, but probably not a detailed description, not even a mandatory field over on the QBO side. But once they're in Ignition, in the context of Ignition, those descriptions are really, really important. So it can be a little bit cumbersome to kind of go through a full list of services, manually type out full service description for every single service. So lucky for you, we have a really cool, awesome AI tool that kind of helps fill those gaps. So with our suggested description tool, all you need is a service name, which we're going to pull in from QBO for you. And our tool can basically write an appropriate description for you. It makes it kind of the perfect pairing with being able to import all those services from QBO. So in that way, adding new services into Ignition, it's like quicker and easier than ever, allow you to get building your proposals much, much faster. Next, the last thing I want to call attention to is going to be QBO classes. I mentioned that very briefly just a second ago. So in the past, now that you fine-tune your services, in the past, you would map out your individual services in Ignition to services in QBO so that the revenue can kind of flow through nicely to the appropriate chart of accounts. That is really obviously important, but now you can kind of go one step further from that and actually leverage QuickBooks classes in Ignition to add a whole other layer of insight and detail. This really just kind of improves and levels up the reporting and data capabilities that you already have in QBO. Kind of takes another level. So I'm sure many of you QuickBooks users might already be using QuickBooks Class, and I'm sure maybe some of you haven't up until now. So if you haven't been up until now might be a great time to take a look at that, see if there's some additional insights from the revenue that's from being pushed from Ignition to QBO that you could take advantage of. And I would say for a lot of things, for a lot of people who've already been using QuickBooks Classes, this has been a long time coming. So Ignition now works even better with your existing Ignition account. And Maria is going to run you through this whole setup in a little bit more detail in our next demo. So I'll hand it back over to Maria, where she'll kind of talk about some of these things and show you a little bit of a demo of them.
Sweet, thanks, Evan. So we'll walk through all of the points that Evan covered off, and this should only take a few clicks in terms of how you can quickly set this up within your Ignition account. So I'm going to start with my QBO account. I have some products and services that I've already listed out, and you'll see I have some stuff that I've already worked on. I have a list of my ongoing services, and this is what I want to map over into Ignition. I also have my QBO classes also set up. So I just want to be able to kind of transfer all of this into Ignition seamlessly. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly add a new service here just to show you how quickly this works. So the name for this will be Unlocking Efficiency. Oops. There we go. Class will be, I have a demo class set up. I'm gonna just input my sales price here and just leave the rest as is. Oh, did that go ahead and delete? Oops. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this service here. If I search for it now, I have it here in my QBO. I've also set up the class for it. I've already connected to my QuickBooks account. And in the setup of this, you'll see you have the class toggle here, which you'll want to have on. So you want to go ahead and toggle that on if you haven't done so already. And at the bottom here, I have 32 services that are ready to actually import, along with all of the other features that Evan had covered off. We have the client import, and we also have repeating invoices, which you can also migrate over into Ignition fairly efficiently. So because I just added that service, I'm going to go ahead and manually sync this fairly quickly. So this should just take a few seconds. So we should see that service jump from 32 to 33 available with the new service mapped. We'll just give this another few seconds. So while that syncs over, I'll cover off some of the repeating invoice import as well. So if you have services on repeating invoices, those will actually also map over into Ignition as new services. And if those are mapped to classes, it works in the same fashion. So now that I have my QuickBooks synced up, I've done a force refresh. I'll go to apps again, and then now I have 33 services that are ready for import. So I'm going to click on the import button, and I'm going to go ahead and search for that new service. And there we go. I have unlocking efficiency in QBO. So I'm going to go ahead and import that service into my Ignition account. And you'll see it's going to take me directly to my services list. So I'm going to click on the service that I just imported, and you'll see it's missing a description. I'm going to click on that service here, and this is where the AI tool will kick in. So I have just the service name, but I don't necessarily have a service description for that listed out yet. So I'm just going to click on the Suggest Description button here. I'll give this another few minutes to kick off a service description for me. So you'll see here, I have like a pretty in-depth service description written out for me. I have the option to refine it. I can elaborate, I can make it lengthier, I can shorten it, or I can simplify it. So this is a really great tool to use if you already have your services list kind of mapped out, but you're lacking a little bit in the service description or the scope of work for those particular services. You also have the option to regenerate as well. So if you're not super happy with what the system has generated, you can click on regenerate, and it will give you the option to refine that a little bit further. So I'm going to click on use, and it just copy and paste it right into the service description box. And now if I go into apps, I can see that my class is already synced. So it's synced to that demo class that I mapped it to originally in QBO. And all I'm going to do from here is click on save. And my service is now ready to use in a proposal. So if I go to create a new proposal, I'm going to head over into services. Let's say this is a recurring service. I'm going to click on, I'm going to try to find this here, and there we go. And my service is fully set up. It's ready to go. I mean, I'm ready to send this proposal out to the client with that service listed and that full service description as well. And it's also going to track that directly in QBO as those invoices are starting to kick off for the client on a recurring basis.